if you're determined and you're going to go do this as I am, like you have to be better. Like you just have to do more. And like, because often you find yourself doing things with your arms tied behind your back. You have to get good at doing more with less. I mean, so either you're going to be great or it's going to kind of kill you, or you're just not going to take it on to begin with. And I would like to see more women thinking bigger, because the bigger we think, the more likely it can happen.
Welcome, everyone, to the Tech Business Roundtable podcast show. This is a podcast show dedicated to shining a spotlight on tech innovators, entrepreneurs, founders, and the compelling narratives behind the movements they've established. I'm your host, Ryan Davies, and I'm hosting today's discussion on breaking glass algorithms, women entrepreneurs, and podcast AI with Melinda Wittstock. Melinda, thank you so much for being here today. I'm very excited for this podcast.
Yeah, Ryan, great to be here. Thank you for having me on.
I mean, podcasts about podcasts. Is this the joy or what, right? So
there are more and more of them. There's lots of podcasts about podcasting now.
Yeah. Right. I love it. So a little bit about Melinda for our listeners. She is a visionary 5-time serial entrepreneur and innovator in media and tech. She serves as the founder and CEO of Podopolo, the world's first interactive AI-powered podcast app and creator marketplace, focused on listeners and viewers for them to be able to discover podcasts, playlists, clips, and video streams tailored to their interest and those of their friends, focusing again on innovative features, growth, fan engagement, content monetization. She's also the host of Wings of Inspired Business podcast, reaching over 1 million listeners. Entrepreneur Magazine recognized Wings as the number 8 business podcast recently, with the podcast that shares entrepreneurial journeys, epiphanies, practical advice from successful female founders who have built multi-million-dollar businesses. 30 years of experience as a host, a journalist, an entrepreneurial success, an executive across, it's like every media brand that I can imagine here. So, Melinda, I think our listeners are excited more to hear about everything you have to offer. And I'd love to just sort of start with sharing the inspiration behind the founding of Podopolo.com and the role it plays in the podcasting ecosystem.
Well, thank you, Ryan. You know, I've been innovating at the intersection of media and technology. Kind of feels like for a long time, right? From that introduction. Been pretty busy. But in 2017, I became a podcaster myself. And even with all that expertise, whether I'd been busy, innovating in the beginnings of AI on supervised machine learning and natural language processing, but also in other aspects of my career, creating a show for BBC television and growing that to a 20 million audience, or, creating Financial Times television for CNBC, all these different things. I had all this experience. And yet, as a podcaster, I was struck by how difficult it was up against, and back then it was only Apple, really was the only game in town, how difficult it was to be discovered. Up against the way the algorithms were, let alone to actually understand who was listening to your podcast and what they cared about. And then on to monetization, it was next to impossible. And at one point I found myself I had 5 different side hustle businesses to support my podcast, to kind of make it profitable. And I was sort of thinking, well, man, I had a mastermind, I had those online courses, I had summits, just all these things, right, around the podcast. And I thought, man, if it's hard for me, what about everybody else? And that was the beginning kind of epiphany of what could I do to make this ecosystem much better for creators. Because right now, even now, only 98% of podcasters don't even qualify for advertising the way the ad market works, which is crazy. So I just perceived there were a lot of structural problems. I started talking to a lot of other podcasters, realized that I was not alone, that they all needed a solution to allow themselves to be more easily discovered, grow their audience, engage their audience, and make money from podcasting. Meanwhile, I thought about the fans, because I'm a big podcast fan. I live and breathe all things podcasts. I listen to I'm the biggest consumer of podcasts, ever. And across all genres, I love them. And And I found it, and just like a lot of other fans, really difficult to discover, new content around what interests me at any given moment. Like, there was no really good search functionality. Nobody had a really good recommendation engine, very, very difficult. Nobody was offering any way to interact with other people who were listening to the same podcast as you, right?
Yeah.
Then I took it a step further. It's like, wait a minute, what about the advertisers? This is the fastest growing media of all time. It is and should be a significantly bigger chunk of the overall digital advertising market globally. And what is stopping that? Because advertisers are leaving money on the table. Because hands down, podcast ads convert better than any other. And yet it was this tiny sliver.
Right.
And so it was really that kind of understanding that led me to say, okay, so what can I do with all my knowledge and background to really change this ecosystem? So the result is Podopolo.
It's amazing. And I mean, let's kind of dig into that a little bit about how AI specifically and what you're deploying can improve the overall user experience for both podcast creators and listeners. Like what sort of technology and what sort of strategy is in play to make sure that you're capitalizing on that?
Yeah, 100%. Well, so Podopolo automatically ingests all known podcasts and audio and video and all languages and genres. Now, our AI is able to go into all of those. This is hundreds of millions of episodes. And I like to say instantaneously, but it really takes about a minute to automatically transcribe all of those episodes. Now, in that transcription, it can detect what we call entities, so keywords, key phrases, sentiment, names, etc. So you actually know what each episode is actually about. Now, once you're there's a whole bunch of things. Obviously, that powers a very supercharged recommendation engine that personalizes content discovery at scale. It also allows advertisers to actually know where their ads are going to be most effective and gives them some brand safety as well, that their ad isn't going to be put on a podcast that, embarrasses them in some way, just by being adjacent to a piece of content that they don't want their brand associated with, for instance, right?
Right.
But it also powers things like, automatic creation of clips and podcast synopses and rundowns and such for a listener to really, or a viewer to really be able to find exactly the content they want. Now, the clip creation already on Podopolo right now, anybody can go and they're listening to an episode. You can create a clip of your favorite moment and share that all across social media and messaging platforms. Amazing. And all the rest, and Podopolo itself. What's coming though is AI is going to be automatically creating those as well. That's great for the podcaster because it helps discovery. Because Ryan, if I say to you, hey, there's this great podcast, you got to listen to it, it's an hour. And you'll say, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Melinda, I'll get around to that. And you may or may not because you're busy, right? Most people are. Most people are suffering from what I call infobesity. I just like too much.
I love that term.
All the time, right? But if I share with you like a 1 minute clip or a 30-second clip, I mean, you're more likely just to listen to it. And then if you like it, you follow that podcaster and whatnot. For the podcaster, that counts as a download. I mean, it helps them grow their audience and be discovered by more people and such, right? So again, it's helping podcast discovery, both for the fan and the podcaster. And then it's lending a level of predictability and also just a higher return on investment for advertisers. So it's one thing where literally everybody wins. There's lots of other derivations of the AI that's coming soon because, more and more, just all the generative pieces of it as well, where podcasters want to know. So on our platform, for instance, and we're partnering with hosting companies and ad networks and such through, an API that will allow them to do all the things that we're doing also, right? Because we really believe in serving the whole ecosystem. And so a podcaster, for instance, what's the best title for my podcast? So I'm going to be most easily discovered, right?
Right.
The best way to market this? Can I auto-generate marketing content around my podcast based on that original? All goes back to the transcript.
It's just incredible. I mean, I know you've just touched on it there, and this was where I kind of wanted to continue the conversation. Is what future trends do you see at this intersection of AI and podcasting that's coming, where, it's going to be, this stuff's going to become the mainstream. This is going to be the expectation, the table stakes, right? For what people can expect. I mean, hyper personalization, as you mentioned, is coming. Do you see like it's probably there, where entire content, entire episodes, entire series are AI generated, and
Yeah.
things like that are going to be custom to a listener, right? Is that where
Yeah.
you kind of see things
That's
moving?
happening. That's happening more and more. I mean,
Mm,
in the AI technology, I mean, we've already seen things like voice cloning, like, being able to take a
yeah,
snippet of someone's voice and then just like make a podcast in Japanese, or like, you know what I mean, right? There's a lot of speech to text, generative content, and in all of that. That's let's talk about the good part first, and then some of
yes,
the downsides, and then some of the solutions that we see for those downsides. But one of the good things is podcasters want to create great content, right? They have a mission, they have something they want to teach, or something about the world that they want to, change or whatever, right? And it's a lot to create really good content, and not all podcasts, are great. So podcasters want to get better, but because they're so focused on their content, as they should be, it's really hard to also be a marketing expert, to also be a great ad salesperson,
yeah,
also to be a great technologist, all these things. And so one of the best things for the podcast ecosystem is just making it easier, for all the podcasters, right? To
right.
just take all that like overwhelm, because a lot of them are very overwhelmed, with all of this, to help them. So that's really huge. And it speaks to monetization, discovery, all the things, and just improving their content. Especially when you start to add in insights about the audience and what the audience likes, so a podcaster can be more responsive to their audience. So these are all the really great things. I mean, there's a lot of generative content and whatnot. The downside, though, can be, how does a podcaster actually protect their content and their content ownership? And we've seen this in AI, where all the debates about copyright, and
Hmm.
increasingly it's in the courts and such. Because if I could take a snippet of your voice, Ryan, and just create this podcast in Japanese or Spanish, or like monetize it all over the place, you'd be like, hey, wait, that's my content. And there's it's kind of Wild West. There's nothing,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Yeah.
So this we see as being a bigger issue, and our solution is the blockchain. And why the blockchain? Because it is a ledger of who owns what. So very soon on Podopolo, and people are on there, they'll automatically be able to authenticate the ownership of their work. That is really, really critical in a Gen AI world. I think one of the things that people haven't really seen in terms of technological trends is where, blockchain is associated with crypto, but it's just so much more than that
Yes. Yeah.
in terms of what it can do. So it's that kind of protection of ownership, but it also can aid discovery of content as well, because you can see, who's associated with what. It aids discovery. It also aids, there's so many other different things too, about just a podcaster wanting to reward their audience, or maybe they want to crowdfund around their podcast, or maybe they want to give kind of gamified tokens, right, that can
Right.
increase in
Yeah.
value. I mean, there's so many different things that can be done in that space. And so we really see the convergence of those two being the solution to a lot of the issues around AI.
That's incredible. I mean, like you said, that throws that serial number almost in a way of, this is mine, but it's also leaves that open source idea of being able to share it, the knowledge, the creative aspect of the podcast out there. For you, whether it's in podcasting or tech, again, this is where your podcast comes in, but for aspiring female entrepreneurs and podcasters and people looking to enter this space, do you see it as is there a difference? Is this kind of the great leveling between the two, in terms of, hey, there's a lot of tools out there, so you can get it out there? What's your experience and advice around that?
Yeah, in a lot of ways it can be, right? Because it becomes, as long as it's not cost prohibitive. I mean, AI is not cheap. Like, when we're talking about the processing level that we're doing,
Yeah.
it's pretty significant. But, obviously just over time, access to these tools and just the way podcasters are using them already, it does, and it can have the effect of really leveling the playing field. However, it's not easy for everybody to just go create their own large language model, right? Right. Because can you afford a NVIDIA chip? Even one. Can you?
Right.
Right.
Yeah, it's yeah, especially in today's landscape and everything else. It's just there's still many barriers to entry that exist, right? And that's just one of many. For you, like, again, personally, how do you see the future of this going, particularly for women in this space, and in whether it's in tech entrepreneurship, podcast entrepreneurship, and is there a movement to sort of foster greater inclusivity into this space?
Man, I've been for years now, and I think one of the reasons I launched my podcast is I really wanted to affirm and acclaim the female entrepreneurial journey.
Yeah.
And I find that very few women really take on the excitement and the burden equally of saying, okay, I'm going to go transform an entire industry using kind of cutting edge technology and build a $1 billion plus unicorn. I mean, there aren't very many role models, first of all, for women who just dare to do that. And it is hard, for sure. It's hard for anybody, but there's an extra degree of difficulty because women still are getting 2% of the venture capital, all those kind of structural kind of issues that you have to push through. It has the impact, though, of making better businesses, because if you're determined and you're going to go do this as I am, like you have to be better. Like you just have to do more. And like, because often you find yourself doing things with your arms tied behind your back. You have to get good at doing more with less. I mean, so either you're going to be great or it's going to kind of kill you, or you're just not going to take it on to begin with. And I would like to see more women thinking bigger, because the bigger we think, the more likely it can happen. But if you cancel yourself out as, no, I'm going to do like a consumer not that there's anything wrong with this, right? Like any kind of entrepreneurship is great, but there's a real temptation to stick to industries, right, that you kind of know, or sort of, right, or lifestyle businesses or cash flow business, all these sorts of things where women really do excel. And it is a little bit easier because there's more of a proven path in that. So, but I would like to see more women kind of daring kind of to do this. I think there's a lot that women bring to the table that is very unique. It's just like literally just the way our brains work. It's the kind of same thing that allows us to be doing lots of different things and say, yeah, your socks are over there at the same time as we're doing this, because over millennia, we raised kids, ran the house, did this, did all these different things. We tend to connect the dots and be a little less linear, a lot more relationship focused, which is really good in business. And Podopolo is a living, breathing example of this, because it is a connect the dots thing. It's like, how can we put chocolate and peanut butter together in this unique way? I see women, just through all the women I've mentored over the years, just the ecosystem itself, and through my podcast, being more likely to develop businesses like that. They're a lot more transformational. Women come into it with a lot more domain expertise and like actually lived experience. They tend to start startups later in life. And they don't necessarily fit the VC pattern of like, I remember coming away from a meeting for several startups ago, I was innovating a company called Newsit, 2011, 2012, where we had innovated natural language processing, unstructured data search, unsupervised machine learning to understand the relevance and the reliability from a veracity standpoint of user-generated content. That was really hard because there was no AI. Like doing that business now would be much easier. We were essentially solving the fake news problem before anyone knew there was like a fake news or a disinformation problem. But I had seen how social media was going to go, sadly. Right. And the problems we have now. Now, at the time, it was very difficult to make that case to investors because people really couldn't kind of see it. But I had 500,000 people on this app creating content. And I took a VC meeting, and the VC had said, well, Melinda, this is all really great. It's very exciting. Somebody's going to do it. I said, what do you mean? Like, looking behind me.
That's why I'm here.
Like I am doing it. I've had like no money into this thing. I've got like 500. So I've innovated on like a bleeding edge of this technology, and like what? And he literally said to me, we invest based on pattern recognition. And I was like, okay, well, that's great, because we're using pattern recognition in our technology, like obviously missing the and he was like, no, what I mean is, we know that, okay, these startups got here, and what were the attributes, and I was like, okay, well, I'm not getting anywhere with this guy. And as I was walking down the street, I was thinking, let's see, how do I not fit the pattern? I'm like, okay, well, I didn't go to MIT, Stanford, or Harvard, and moreover, I did not drop out of any of those schools, right? I didn't invent anything in my garage, because I don't have one. Like, I was in New York at the time. I don't have a garage. So like, that's not open to me. Let's see, not 20 something. And, oh, I don't eat ramen noodles because they're like too many carbs. Like, right. Like I literally, no, and I'm not wearing a hoodie,
Yeah, right. Yeah.
and it was literally that, like, and so I would challenge VCs to be, a little bit more open-minded, that there are lots of different founder journeys. Like, not every founder journey is the same. In fact, they're all different. There are some patterns, there are some things that are true of everybody, around rules like product market fit, and, being resilient, and, all these sorts of things, right? Like being good at sales, like all the things, right? But everybody's journey is different, because every individual is unique, and the entrepreneurial journey is surely a unique one for everybody. Also, for women to think bigger, and also women who've had exits, to invest in other women. And you asked a little bit about how the ecosystem is changing, and I think that's really where we're going to start to see more of that kind of impact. But there needs to be more exits. Women investors need to raise bigger check sizes from the insurance companies and the pension funds and such. And, I mean, it's a continuum, but like, the more of us dare to just do this and walk this path, however hard it is, the more license it gives to new women. And I just like the hashtag around my podcast says, we've got to lift as we climb. So, women really do need to be helping each other, and with allies, with men that see our potential. And, that's important too. So
Incredible. I mean, it's just that story right there of being typecasted within a pigeonhole, or pigeonholed and then typecasted. I guess I'm not sure which one comes before.
I don't know. I mean, I've had so many stories like that. I could go on to podcast.
It's like unbelievable. I mean, with that, I want to ask one key question about you personally, and like your leadership style. And you said you've been doing this for a while. The evolution of your leadership style, has it changed over time? What have you noticed, and what do you really embrace with that leadership style to, again, stand out and be brave, be that leader that you're trying to to bring out in everybody else?
I think it starts with the fact that if you want therapy, just become an entrepreneur, okay? Because you're going to go on a personal growth journey, whether you like it or not, like, right? And with that comes better leadership. The more conscious you are, like, literally, people live in the past, they live in the future, they live in their own egos, but the more kind of really conscious you are and present, the better a leader you're going to be. And I'll start on that kind of conscious. It sounds a little spiritual, but I think that's where I've really evolved the most. And how that impacts is creating a company where people are really aligned on, like, what are our shared values? And how do we operationalize those values? So in Podopolo's case, for instance, their innovation, their integrity, abundance mindset, for instance, collaboration. So it's one thing to stick those things up on a website and then forget about it. And it's a whole other thing to really lean into, how do we operationalize that? What does that mean for who we're being, as well as what we're doing on the team? I've become much more collaborative. I do believe that in a team, you need people that have joy in their work, that they actually love what they're doing, and they're really aligned, really in the mission, and they have a clear understanding that in a startup or any emerging growth company, it's not what you're doing, it's the result that matters, right? and fostering a culture where people feel safe. They're heard, they're listened to, but safe to say and to think outside the box, like to say, hey, Melinda, no, that's not going to work, not be afraid to do that. Right. So I like to create space for that. But, again, it's not easy because I think a lot of people, when they're, applying for a job at a startup company, they're kind of thinking it's like a job. Okay. That's the way we've all been trained. And an entrepreneur, and this is something I've had to, is thinking, God, like, why isn't everybody entrepreneurial? Like, come on, and so there can sometimes, right. Because, and I am getting better and better and better in the hiring or recruitment process of just like repelling people almost, right? It's like, because if you want security here or you just want to show up and this is going to be maybe not the right kind of thing. Like, we're really, kindness is one of our highest values, all these things, but all the same, at the end of the day, you're building something sometimes against headwinds, in a really competitive environment where you got to pivot in an instant. You got to be constantly learning. You can't be afraid of failure. You can't have any shame around failure because there's failures every day. And like, so how do you bring in the right people that are going to be able to go with that? And obviously, as you get much bigger, but that initial core team, from like, there's one of you to 50 to 100. I mean, that's just so vital, especially in those stages.
Yeah, I think that's so many amazing points to take away from there. And I want to kind of close on the idea of looking ahead for you, for the industry. I mean, we will focus a bit on women in the industry, obviously, but I mean, you touched points on, there's lots of people who are marginalized, whether it's in tech, whether it's in podcasting, trying to get out there, whether it's they just don't have the budget to do so, they don't have the resources, they don't have whatever it is. What's your hopes and aspirations for the future here? Where do you see it going? And I know with what you're doing with Podopolo, that's part of what you're trying to do, right? Is create a bit of a open playing field and open access so everybody can kind of follow and chase that dream that they're looking for, right?
Well, one of the things I mentioned was one of our highest values, which is abundance mindset. And the way we approach it is, how can we make everybody kind of better? Like, for instance, we don't have to be the only destination, right? It's not really about ego. It's about service. How can we partner with people who maybe in another context would be a direct competitor? Like, how can we leave the world better in like kind of everything we do? And now it's not true of all women, but I think I see the business landscape eventually moving more towards that, more inclusive, more, more ecosystem focused, more, of service. And maybe I see it that way because I wish the world was more like that, so I say that with a caveat. But I think businesses that do approach things with more of that kind of abundance mindset are the new businesses. And you see it, happening, just like command control models don't really work culturally anymore. And you see it in things like the evolution of blockchain or even social media, where the move from Web 2 to Web 3, and Web 3 being interoperable, decentralized, where creators own their own audiences rather than Facebook or Spotify or whoever. I mean, that's where we're moving, but I think that's where ultimately people want to be. It's empowering and for everybody concerned, right? So, that's my kind of vision of what I'd like to see more of, because it's just better for people all around.
As a dad to two young girls, that I'm trying to give them that don't be afraid, go out there and give it a go and things like that. I think
And don't be afraid to fail. Like,
that's exactly it, right? It's okay. And my oldest is a perfectionist. She hates anything that's I can't do it right away. I'm never doing this again. She gets that from me. I think
that
actually too. It's
is perfectionism. Actually, I think is one of the biggest things that holds women back, because we're almost taught to be like that. Like in school, like I remember when my kids were really little, and like the difference between my daughter and my son, like she'd want to make sure that her homework looked really neat and pretty. And like, it's like don't, it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? Whereas
Yeah.
he's running around, right? And but perfectionism keeps us playing a smaller game, because you can just plan and like perfect to the point that the market just passes you by. So you've got to be willing to go out with something that's not a completed thought yet, to co-create with your customers, let them tell you that something kind of sucks so you can do better, and but that requires you to not take failure or feedback personally.
Yes.
To just see it as learning. So that's all it is. Failure is feedback.
It's just such an incredibly important point for everybody to remember. But yeah, especially, for young women, especially, don't worry about that perfectionism. It's just doing something new, innovative, exciting is perfect, really, in its own sense. So Melinda, I could talk to you all day about this. I think we could do. I want to have you back as many times as possible.
Oh,
I
fantastic. I'd
thank
love
you
to.
so much for this podcast. I think there's so much to take out of this, and for our listeners, they're going to absolutely love it. And I want to thank, really genuinely thank you for this incredible podcast today. Breaking Glass Algorithms, Women Entrepreneurs in Podcasting and AI. Thank you 1,000 times.
You're welcome. It was a delight. I could do this all day too.
But maybe we'll just have to do a few of them. I'll have to get you back for a few. Like I said before this, we said I got about 50 questions. I'm going to try and limit the time to not ask all 50. So there's still, I think, 47 on the list almost for where we went. So Melinda Wittstock, thank you so much. I want to thank our listeners as well. We can't do what we do without you. So until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I'm your host, Ryan Davies. Before we back out here, Podopolo.com. Melinda, I want to give you one more chance here. Anything that you want to plug here to drive people where they can get to know you better and things like that, of course.
Oh yeah, so I can just be found on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is, of all the social platforms, probably the one that I use the most. It's just Melinda Wittstock. And obviously download Podopolo. It's free in both app stores. If you're a podcaster, you can take advantage of our free offer when you come in for free as a Podopolo Pro, just by authenticating, that it's your podcast. You get really advanced analytics. You get extra juice in our recommendation engine. You get a whole bunch of monetization tools and such. So I invite you to join us.
This is fantastic. Thank you so much again. As I mentioned, we can't do it without what we do without our listeners. So until we meet again with another amazing TBR episode, I'm your host, Ryan Davies. Thank you, Melinda, and thanks everybody. Take care out there.